Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, we're almost at the end of March, but it's no less ferocious and tumultuous than how it started. There is a lot going on in the world, and sometimes I think it feels like we're all drowning in shit. And I am very grateful to have a returning champion to help guide us through the times, especially when it seems like there are mountains of shit. A guy who has a laser sharp mind, one of the best pens or now keyboards in America, and is a dear and thoughtful friend. The great and powerful Matt Gallagher is finally back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be back with you.
So last time we talked to you, you were in Poland. Now you're in maybe an even more interesting place. So I'll start with, where are you and how are you?
Doing well. Living the family life and dad life here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My wife and two boys and I moved down here from Brooklyn about a year and a half ago for a writers fellowship, and it's been a big change, different part of America, but we've really taken to it. It's nice, and one of the cool things is you learn people are people everywhere, right? I mean, they're good Americans everywhere. And hey, we have a yard now, which the kids love. So that's pretty cool too.
So I want to talk to you about a lot of things. I want to just kind of go around the horn. I want to talk about Trump, and I want to talk about Iraq at 20. I want to talk about Ukraine and the fabulous article you wrote there. I'd love to talk sports and just American culture. I feel like, Sebastian Younger was on a couple weeks ago, and I feel like whenever I touch base with him, he gives us a good sense of the world, and you do the same. But I can't move off this Tulsa thing because is the only other person who moved from Brooklyn to Tulsa who also has a platform like Sylvester Stallone in Tulsa King. Have you watched that show? And if you have, I think it's awesome. If you haven't or you have, what are your thoughts on that and that kind of a transition?
Yeah, we have seen it. It's a good show. We actually saw it filming. My wife Annie is an assistant principal in North Tulsa, and last year, we would see Tulsa King kind of filming in kind of this empty strip mall every morning. And we never saw Sly himself, though, friends and acquaintances you see about town would have spotted him in a coffee shop or in the mall. Like there's a mall on the other side of town that it's like walking into 1995 because it's full, it's packed. You see teenagers wearing their Letterman's jackets. It's like the internet shopping does not exist. So that was a big change from that's not something you saw in Brooklyn very much. But let's see, Woody Guthrie is big down here. The Bob Dylan Center is a big spot here as well. So they're doing a real good job. Part of my writers fellowship, it's a real small piece of kind of this foundation that's funded by an oil billionaire who's devoting his fortune to kind of helping rebuild and rejuvenate his hometown. And it's really kind of a weird, vibrant city in the best of ways. I mean, like any place else, it has its faults, but we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into. We just kind of wanted an American adventure, and we have gotten that. Yeah.
I love it. I look forward to reading and seeing all your perspective on this. I would remind everyone to follow you on Twitter. You're one of my favorite people to follow on the winding and weird cesspool that is Twitter. But you're also one of my favorite people to touch base on all things because you've got such an insightful view, and you're funny and you keep it real. And I think you're just able to communicate a feel for things in a way that other people can't. So let me just ask you, Matt, like off the top here, I mentioned we're kind of all going through shit. So we're late. I was late in recording this because my 4-year-old hasn't pooped properly in like 4 weeks. So it's been a very traumatic time, a lot of screaming, not a lot of pooping, and then lots of pooping. So like, I feel like for the last couple weeks, my wife and my kids and I have literally like been covered in shit, but I also feel like America feels like that right now with like Trump and the bank collapses and the stresses of, potential violence. But taking a step back, Matt, like where is America right now? What's your read on where our country is right now?
Things feel very tense. Last weekend, I attended a literature conference in Pennsylvania. So I passed through New York for one of the first times since we moved away. and it was actually the same day as the St. Patrick's Day parade, and news was starting to circulate about Trump's possible arrest, and yeah, there was kind of a nervous energy in Midtown Manhattan that I don't remember. There's always always an energy to Midtown Manhattan, but there's a political tenseness that I on a parade day on a holiday that I don't remember being there previously. Certainly, when I check in with folks that I served with in the Army who maybe have different political views than I do, there's an anger and a distrust and a cynicism that I don't personally feel, but they do, and that makes it real, right? That's part of being in a republic is agreeing to disagree. So in some ways, I am deeply nervous, right? I worry that January 6th wasn't a one-off; that perhaps it was a prologue to something darker and larger. And the divisiveness of the last at least 7 years, if not longer, isn't fading the way I think many of us hoped it would. That said, part of the welcome change to coming to Oklahoma has been kind of realizing, a lot of people, most people don't live and die with the highs and lows of cable news. They're just going about their days, trying to provide for their families, checking in with their neighbors. A great anecdote that I tell people when we first moved here, we've been here about 2 or 3 months, and it was the first big tornado warning. This is tornado country. And independently, 4 different neighbors came to check in on the strange new Yankees because they weren't sure that we knew what to do, and we didn't. And they just wanted to check in on us. And these are all kinds of different people. One is kind of your prototypical good old boy, right? Drives a pickup truck. Another's a real friendly gay couple that we've become good friends with. The family next door has a boy about our eldest age, and we become close with them, and they play. People from different walks of life might have different worldviews. It was just a very American experience, and I try to remember that when I'm feeling in great despair for my country. And I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna about this. These are dangerous times, but hope still persists if you allow it to, and if you look for it.
This is why I love talking to you, man. And I also had to have you on around St. Patrick's Day, because that is just maybe I'll have you come each year on St. Patrick's Day for kind of a check-in on all things American. But you're one of my friends that's kind of a keeper of the flame in America. And I think we've had folks like Ken Burns on who've talked about grievance, and I mentioned Sebastian and Jason Dempsey and others who I think have a really astute understanding, strategic view, and then just like a gut feel for America. And I feel like you've got that no matter where you are, and it's part of why you're such a powerful writer. As you just filed your turned in your newest novel, Daybreak, which I'm excited to hear more about. But you're now writing about so many things, and you're touching on all these pieces. But we always have this understanding about national security, right? As veterans, and culture, and even violence, right? Like understanding violence. By the time this airs, Trump may have been indicted. There may be violence, but can you talk about that? Let's assume he's indicted. Whether he does the perp walk or not, we don't know. But what do you think that means? How do you feel about that? And, if one day you're going to talk to your 2 boys about this, how do you explain what this moment is?
I think most importantly this is proof for us all that this is a nation of laws, right? That if he hasn't been convicted yet or anything, but that power can and will be held accountable. And I've seen some chatter that perhaps it's disappointing that it this is mostly coming out, at least initially, mostly coming from Stormy Daniels, as opposed to, say, some of the alleged election tampering in 2020. Rules are rules. The law is the law, and sometimes it's not going to be exactly what you dreamed of. It's not going to be a silver bullet for everything. You know, Al Capone being a very famous example. The government finally got him on tax evasion, right? But that even a former president of the United States of America can and will be held accountable, and that has almost always not been the case in the history of this country. So, in a way, this is perhaps a marker of progress, right? That unlike Nixon, unlike some other former presidents that operated in the gray, this is indicative that we are still committed to being a more just, more righteous nation that applies to everyone. As for the potential violence, you know, that unfortunately goes with the territory in these political times. I just hope the people who are clamoring about it realize what it actually means. I'm not sure they do. It could just be a lot of hot air. You know, another guest of yours, I think Malcolm Nance, made a great point on Twitter that, you know, oh, we're all going to gather in New York City and protest together. I can't think of a more surveilled place in America, right? Just to get into the city, you're, you know, going on the bridges or the underpasses. They're taking, you know, every license plate is being taken. You know, if you don't think some highly trained professionals are watching your every move, if that's what you're planning, you're a fool. So got to do what you got to do. It's not something I take lightly. On the other hand, you know, the alternative is ignoring it, and I think we've already seen the consequences of what that can do over the long term, and that is very corrosive to our country. So that can't happen anymore either.
Matt, I've long said that I feel like America will not be taken as seriously by the rest of the world unless Trump's in handcuffs. Like, I feel like the damage that he's done to the world and the damage he's done, especially to our country, as kind of like an abusive stepfather who took over our house and started beating up everybody and breaking everything. I feel like there needs to be accountability for the world to see that there's accountability. And I think it might be the first time we really see it at this level, but he's also been the most egregious. So it seemed like he was so sloppy, he was so arrogant, he was so everywhere. It felt like only a matter of time before he hit some guardrail, right? Even before he was elected, I was talking about that. But the violence piece, you know, I look at, you know, in a unique way, I think, because as I've told people, you only need like a couple 100,000 people for an insurgency. And he's got millions, maybe tens of millions of supporters, and all that surveillance is in place. But it also feels a bit like after 9/11, where I thought about the St. Patty's Day parade. And I'm like, do I take my kids? My wife says, stay out of Midtown, because we know about the symbolism of places like New York and DC. And January 6th maybe underscores that. I've called it the American insurgency. You've fought insurgencies, you know, you've really tracked on them around the country and around the world. And now you're following everything happening in Ukraine. How do you describe the national security threat of this? These people who will do violence in support of Trump to overthrow the government and change our direction. How do you categorize it, and how do you think about it?
So, you know, I'll preface by saying I'm hardly an expert on the subject, but it's something I am greatly interested in, and did once was a counterinsurgent. So one thing that I think about on this issue that gives me a bit of hope is almost always a real vibrant insurgency has to be grounded in poor economic conditions, right? Because that's where they recruit from. Not just Iraq being a prominent example, but think of Northern Ireland, right? Yeah, there was a lot of pro-Irish sentiment, but the recruitment where they pulled the rank and file from were from the Belfast slums, right? I mean, these were kids who didn't even have other options, right? I mean, they weren't ideologues. So when I look around and see America, there is far too much economic disparity here for quote unquote the greatest country in the history of the world, in my opinion. But there's still not kind of the rampant economic insecurity yet that historically really allows a vibrant insurgency to grow. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that a few ideologues can't ruin a St. Patrick's Day parade, right? In an attempt to make something spread. That doesn't mean that a few dozen clowns, like on January 6th, can't try to take advantage of a moment and embrace chaos. I mean, think how lucky, people talk about, Ashley Babbitt and Officer Slotnick. Couple more, feral maniacs in there. It could have been far more violent, right? The footage of those insurrectionists and those that enter the Capitol, I believe meet that terminology, kind of like quietly shuffling away in defeat at the end of that day. It doesn't take much imagination to foresee that day ending far differently and far more violently, right? So, what does that mean in terms of us as everyday citizens? I think it's just kind of like any other piece of modern violence, right? It's finding your own risk factors, your risk limitations, but still not letting it impact your day-to-day life, right? I'm sure you're the same way as me, Paul. Every day I drop off my eldest at kindergarten, I say a prayer and wonder about gun violence, while also trusting the fact that his administration, his teachers have a plan. They do. He's 5 years old and he does drills for those things, and they've talked me through them, and they're a security expert has taught these people well. It's fucking insane to me that here in America this is our reality, but it is, right? And the potential for political violence in our country is something that we as individual people with our families are going to have to consider in the years to come. But if it means not leaving your house, if it means not going, I have kind of fringe Republican friends who won't go into cities for their version of this. I think that's absurd, right? Because and like that quite literally is how you let the terrorists win when it's upturning your life to such a degree. So it's all about not dismissing the risk, but factoring it in to your day-to-day planning, and just kind of part of being an adult in America in 2023, I think.
Yeah, it's our new normal. I mean, it's I remember, and I want to pivot to Iraq. When I left for Iraq, I thought New York would be like Tel Aviv. I was like, we're pissing off so much of the world that there's no way our new normal isn't going to have an increased level of violence. And I expected it. I mean, I never would have predicted that there would have been so little violence domestically. And even now, in the same way, I'm surprised there's not more violence inside Russia from Ukrainians that just want to blast things and disrupt, right? But that's been the reality for the last 20 years here in America. So this is all happening in, I think especially for our era of maybe veterans and politically active people, especially, it's kind of a mindfuck time, right? Like you've got the gun violence, which is always happening, but then you've got Trump and you've got Iraq and you've got Ukraine, and they're all kind of interwoven in different ways. But 20 years later, we were all, you and I and so many of our friends were a part of this, and it's shaped so much of our lives. 20 years later, I'm still processing it. We're all still processing it. I think I get angrier a little bit, or I guess a little bit more focused on the unjustness of the war. And maybe that's because we now see Ukraine, which is a just war. And you wrote about and tweeted about the trauma of what the Ukrainian soldiers are facing, which is unimaginable to me. And the kind of fighting they're facing is unimaginable to me, but they've got a just war. And I feel like that probably sits better with them than what we've got, which is this weird twisting simmer. But 20 years after Iraq, you're one of the most important voices of our time, not just on Iraq, but this entire post 9/11 era. What are your reflections and thoughts, man?
Yeah. At first I thought I had nothing to say about it, because I've been very blessed. I've been writing about my experiences in the war in general for over 10 years now. And I was kind of excited and eager to let some other new voices emerge. It makes sense. It's kind of silly, but the media has glommed onto this anniversary as now's the time to reckon with the Iraq War. which is since the invasion, since your time really when you were over there. They didn't do any of that. I mean, I was over there in 07 and 08, and there was hardly this amount of attention on the war when it was going on.
Right.
So that's been frustrating. But as because we just live in this hot take culture and society, it's just been bizarre watching two things happen simultaneously. On one hand, you have generally on the left, a lot of people wanting to take victory laps because they showed up to one protest back in 2003. They were morally right and they're morally pure, and this doesn't involve them. And I find that just obnoxious. Like, yeah, no shit, you were right. You want a cookie? It made me think of something Elliot Ackerman always says if people ever ask him if he killed anybody during his service. He says, "If I did, you paid for it." Right. And it's something to, people don't like, even though we're a republic, even though this is supposed to be woven into, the American spirit, people don't like being told you are also responsible for something, even if you don't like it. People do not want to hear that. And then, but like insanely to me, I did not think this was going to happen. On the right, National Review had an issue on this, and then a really obnoxious, lazy op-ed by Brett Stevens in the New York Times, trying to say the Iraq War was actually worth it. And what universe do these people live in? I mean, just real sloppy stuff. I mean, Stevens in particular, there's a passage in there. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm paraphrasing, but basically makes the case that because Iraq was bad under Saddam, which is true, and that America toppling Saddam is therefore not morally responsible for what took place after toppling him. That is not how any of this works. And that's not even how the architects of the war saw it. Colin Powell very famously told George W. Bush before the invasion, if we do this, we are responsible for all of these people and all of their lives and everything that happens afterwards. So it's just lazy. It's sloppy. These aren't stupid people. I think they're just ideologues, and they're caught up in kind of the binary political aspects of this. And it's more important for them to pretend that they were right than think about this thoughtfully, because it didn't actually impact. None of these people it impacted personally, right?
Yep.
They don't close their eyes and see their dead friends the way we do. They don't get calls from our former soldiers struggling with things or trying to figure out how to get their VA claim adjusted the way we do. This is all notional for these motherfuckers. And it's still, we knew it 20 years ago, and it still is 20 years later. Here I am 40 years old, still furious at these type of people that were more than happy to, stand up and cheer for us when we didn't have anything to say, but certainly don't want to hear from us now that we're out of uniform and have something to say. Right.
I want to stay on this, Matt, because this is really, really good stuff, because, we also got the burn pits bill passed this summer. Hooray. 20 fucking years later, right? And there's kind of this weird, celebration, while at the same time celebrating something that should have happened long ago, right? And then also never having the complete story. So we're not even talking about how burn pits impacted Iraqis, right? And that's where we continue to try to push this conversation. But this is our journey as a generation, and the 20-year anniversary is also happening where we have kids now that ask questions. We're in middle age now. We're in our 40s and our 30s and our 50s. And our kids are asking questions. And my son asked me, why did they send you over there? And I have explained this 1,000. I couldn't fucking explain it. I couldn't because I really wanted to get it right for him. And I said something along the lines of like, I'm going to have to explain this to you for my whole life. And I'm going to try my best. And I've also, like you kind of want to retire and move on to something different, but you and I have a unique role in that we're elders now. Like at 40, we've been thinking about this for 20 years. And the argument with Brett Stevens is one that I had 20 years ago with neocons on Fox News, and we're replaying it. So I feel like we have to protect our history. And I remember, I think it might've been Bobby Mueller or my friend Wayne Smith, when John Kerry's service was being ripped apart. Somebody said to me, they can do that now because we never really defined the story of Vietnam. like they felt it was a failure on the country's part, or maybe on their part, to really tell the true story of Vietnam. And, how do you tell the true story? Who knows? But as a writer, and as someone who I hope will do films and do many more things that help shape the consciousness of this country around Iraq and around itself, when you want to tell people, hey, how do you understand Iraq 20 years later? You're a professor now, you're a dad. Like, how do you do that? How would you recommend people who want to understand it? Where do they start? What do they read? What do they watch? What do they do?
Oh boy. Heavy questions. I want to start by kind of quoting a Vietnam author who recently passed away a couple of years ago, Larry Heineman, who wrote Paco's Story, and something about the anniversary conversation reminded me of a great quote of his. Somebody asked him, why do you write novels about the war? And he said, because it's more polite than a simple "fuck you." And I've been thinking about that a lot these past few days, because it is complicated in some ways, right? The people that went to Iraq were young men and women who tended to join up for the right reasons. Not all, of course, but wanted to serve their country, saw what had happened on 9/11 and believed this could be a new Pearl Harbor, right? And that kind of idealism, that kind of youthful righteousness was betrayed by our political leaders and by, frankly, a public unwilling to wade into the details and to parse through very obvious facts, like the 9/11 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, not Iraq, right? Like, this seems like you try to explain this, at this writers' conference that I was just at. It was hosted by a university, and you try to talk to 20-year-old kids about this, and they're like, this doesn't make any sense. How were people duped? And it's hard to explain that 70% of Americans supported the Iraq invasion right before it happened, right? And now all these people want veterans to, at least here in American society and Iraqis in Iraq, to bear the burden of these consequences. No, you were part of this too. And showing up to one protest is great, and you were right on the side of it. Did you continue to engage? Did you continue to push? And some people can say yes, right? And many others can't, because they checked out. They did their thing, and then they put their hands up. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. This belongs to us all, and it's ugly, and it needs to be ugly, and we need to remember it that was ugly, so it doesn't happen again. I think that's the great tragedy for our friends who served in Vietnam or who protested Vietnam. For them, if they care about this issue, they saw it happen again. I can't imagine. I can't imagine what that must have felt like. And God knows, at some point, Paul, sometime in our lifetime, these same people that we're talking about are going to try the same shit again. And it's going to be up to all of us, vets and civilians alike, people who care about these issues of war and peace, to push back, right? And to really make sure before this thing kicks off, is this a just war? That's the difference between, you mentioned Ukraine. No, Ukrainians don't have to ask themselves that. Americans don't need to ask themselves that. Like, well, why should we support Ukraine? Because you know what? Genocide is bad. Yeah. Protecting a sovereign democracy is good. It really is that simple. And Iraq never was, and it was always going to get a messy ending because of that. I knew that. I think sometime mid 2008, and things were kind of genuinely improving a little bit in 2008. But even then, I think we all knew it was gonna end messy, because it was screwy from the start, and once things start happening, you can't unscrew it as it goes.
Yeah, I thank you for being on now and having this conversation, because this is the kind of conversation I think we have with some of our more thoughtful friends, not out in the open. And I think people need to hear it. And I'm reluctant to quote anybody, but Joe Klein from Time Magazine once told me, because I was reflecting on the cover story that's got, Wes Moore on it, who's now governor of Maryland, and you were around, and we were part of this group of veterans organizations that had leaders that were trying to do lots of different things in different ways. And now some of them are burnt out. Some of them are dead. One of the guys, Dale was on the cover of that magazine. He's gone, right? And John's still at the work, and there's 5 of us there. But that cover in some ways is really an interesting reflection on it. And also there was the cover of Time magazine that celebrated the American soldier, right, at the high point of popularity of Iraq. But there's what Joe Klein said was something like, the World War II generation built this country. His generation, the Vietnam generation, fucked it up, and it's our generation that has to save it. And part of me at the time was like, okay, I'm up for that. Now I'm like, fuck you. We have to save this too. We have to save the country again. And now we've got our own in government. We've got, Wes Moore as a governor of Maryland. You've got folks like Dan Crenshaw and Seth Moulton. And then you got Tulsi Gabbard, and you got this whole like spectrum of people we know, people we've followed, people we've supported, some of whom have held true, some of which became Eric Greitens, right? And so as you think about this moment, right, where we're being asked again, and maybe we're uniquely positioned to rise to this moment again. Allison Jaslow, the new CEO of IVA, was on CBS this morning, and they asked her, what do you want people to know about Iraq? She basically said, don't do it again. And I give her credit for saying that, because sometimes folks didn't want to say it. They kind of couched it in, well, my buddies were dying for themselves and all that. Nobody wants to say it was fucked up, it was wrong, we never should have done it, we should never do it again. But as we have all this colliding, Matt, what do you think the potential of our generation is? Like, maybe Wes will be our first president who served in Iraq or Afghanistan. I've said that there might be a couple of them. I said it to Wes when he was on the show. We thought it was going to be Wes versus Greitens for president one day. Maybe it's going to be Wes versus DeSantis one day. Or maybe it's going to be Tammy Duckworth versus somebody. Who knows? But this is unfolding now, and we're in our prime, right? Our generation. What do you see about the potential of those of us who are being asked again to save the country or lead the country?
I think maybe part of it's becoming a father. Maybe part of it's just kind of feeling my youthful fury evolve into something else. I think maybe Joe Klein was too hard on his generation, right? The boomers, it's easy to make boomer jokes, but they did a lot of good, right? I mean, the Vietnam War was unjust, right? Like, ending that, it took longer than it needed to, but and it's awful that it was mostly protested the way it was, simply because middle class kids were going. But like, they were right. They were right. Yeah, a lot of those folks ended up becoming Reagan voters 10 years later, and that's weird. But I think it's worth remembering that people are people, and our generation's kind of doing the same thing. You're right. 10 years ago, I was there at IVA with you, and there was kind of like this call to arms that we were going to be different, and we were going to do all these empowering things from the ground level. And some of them meant it. I think Wes so far is proving himself to be one of those people, like the real deal. And I'd love to cast a vote for him for president someday, if he continues to earn it. But then, yeah, you have somebody like Eric Greitens, who was a shameless opportunist, and continues to be a shameless opportunist, in my estimation. And that's because you get any group of people, and you're going to have real deals. You're gonna have hangers on. You're gonna have shameless opportunists. You're gonna, it's gonna be messy. My big hope, if any kind of hope for from those youthful fire days still exists, is that we can be a more diverse country. And all this kind of fraction, since we were 20 years old, this country's kind of been torn apart politically, Iraq being a big reason why. But we're also old enough to remember September 12th. Yeah. And that, if we can just clear this Trump thing, and a certain percentage of the American population fades out to pasture, that in these next 20, 30 years, as millennials and older Gen X become kind of the senior statesmen of this country, we can kind of thread the needle, right? We can tap into righteous fury when we need to, but we can also remember why it's not sustainable in a country like ours to do that constantly, because it's simply not. Like if we keep up if we kept up the Trump years for 20 years, there would be inevitably civil war. It is not sustainable, and we're the only people at a certain point. We're going to be the only people that remember what life was like before. Remember what life was like before the internet, right? We remember the 90s. We remember, goofy partisan warfare. I mean, arguing about Clinton's sex life, like that is so silly. That is so silly now, right? And in some ways, maybe we can help guide the younger generations coming after us that like everything you have grown up to, because it's not their fault. This is the world we have given them. This is the America we have given them. They don't know anything else. We still remember. Maybe we can teach them that it is okay to disagree. It is okay to argue furiously with somebody you care about and still break bread with them the next morning, right? Yeah. But we just got to get through this Trump thing.
I love everything you say, and I've not had a guest use the word righteous so many times in a conversation yet, so I appreciate that. But I think there is a righteousness about the kind of work you're doing and the kind of work that I'm trying to do that I think is really important, because I do think our generation, especially our generation of veterans and leaders, right, have to be translators. We have to translate what America was to what America can be. We have to translate America to itself between different factions. We have to translate America to the pre-internet generation, from the post-internet generation, right? Like we have mentors that only take phone calls, that don't check email. And then we have kids who only know technology. So I think our moment is this next 20 years. And also, frankly, like I have toxin exposures, you have toxin exposures. It feels like there's a clock ticking as simultaneously my Vietnam mentor friends are dying. And you know them, we know them, our friends are in their last days. We've lost people like Max Cleland and others that were translating that generation. So we've got to, I think, assume the mantle. And I think it's leadership, man. But I also come to the point where I feel like America sometimes feels like America to Zelensky, in that, like, I don't need your advice. I don't need a ride. I need your fucking ammunition. And that's what, as a leader, going back to our days at IAVA, I'm outraged by how hard it was for us to raise money. I'm outraged by how hard it still is for Bonnie Carroll at TAPS to raise money to take care of the dead troops, right? Like the fact that there has to be a nonprofit to take care of the families of dead. So there's still a need to wrap the country on the nose and say, hey, you're fucking up and you're not doing enough. And I think we're in a unique position to do that. And then enter Ukraine, right? Where this is, in my view, the fight of our time. Last time we talked to you, you were in Poland, you had just left. Now you've gone back. This article you wrote for Esquire, The Secret Weapons of Ukraine, is awesome. It's so many things in one. I don't want to dismiss it by calling it Hunter Thompson-esque. I ask you to tell me who you think you are as a writer. But this one is so important, Matt, and the things you've written have been so important. But this article kind of gets it all, and frankly, like has to explain it to America through an American prism because they won't understand it otherwise. And you talk about the volunteers, this mishmash of people that are going there, and you tell a story through them. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. I want everyone to read it. But what do you think are the most important takeaways that you want people to understand about that piece?
Oh, first of all, thank you for the kind words. I put a lot of time and effort into it, so that it's out there resonating with readers like that means the world. Yeah, I looked at a lot of new journalism writers, Joan Didion, Michael Hare, who wrote from Vietnam, Hunter Thompson, among others, because Ukraine is an issue I feel personally about, that I care about, that I've been there before as a volunteer trainer of civilians. Going back as a journalist, I knew I couldn't kind of do a totally objective, fully removed newspaper style report. So, but I didn't want this. This isn't about me. This is about the men and women, some international, some local Ukrainians, who have devoted their entire lives to this volunteer movement. Who went right when last March we came home to our families, which was the right decision because I like being married. I like spending time with my sons. But yeah, others stayed. And I wanted to check in with them 9 months into this war effort. So you meet people like William McNulty, whose organization, Operation White Stork, literally drives around the country to different military units handing out tourniquets, because you still find 1989 Soviet era medical kits on some of these Ukrainian soldiers that should not be used. I mean, they're literally saving lives. They're driving around in a volunteer van. Then you meet a Ukrainian woman like Alexandra Blintsova, and she's a military wife, right? She's the equivalent of a Gold Star spouse, running an organization, knitting ghillie suits in a community gym for the local men of Mykolaiv, who would only like a week after we were there break through and push into Kherson. The relationship to America is interesting because you talk to different internationals over there, and they're fine. Some of them are lost soul types, kind of just hanging out, but most of them are purpose driven, right? Have found a real way to make changes on the ground level. I'm thinking of Ahmed Khan, who was a former Clinton White House staffer, who made a bunch of money as in investment banking, and literally just kind of spends most of his time in the country kind of looking for different causes to contribute to. When we met up with him in Odessa, he had just kind of finished funding and helping rebuild an orphanage that Russians had shelled. And something he told me really resonated with me. He's he's a native New Yorker like you are, and he said, Ukraine right now, it reminds me of the America I grew up in, right? In some ways, Ukrainians maybe are more American. They're what Americans see ourselves as right now. They're innovative. They have a gung-ho spirit. They're not waiting on the government to tell them to do something. They're going to go do it. But they're also still respectful of the government, of having some kind of unified authority, and knowing that they need to believe in it on some level to stay together. It's really fascinating to watch, and it makes the tragedy of all these young men and women, most of whom are in their 20s and 30s, dying, resonate even more. I mean, so many of them are citizen soldiers who grew up in the 90s. They're about our age and have been through multiple social revolutions, Orange Revolution, and then Maidan, the in 2013, 2014 being the two most prominent, to attain what they have now. And now they're fighting again to keep it. This war is not new to them. And it's both inspiring and so tragic to see this happening. Some of those civilians we trained back last March are fighting in Bakhmut right now, and it's very poignant in many different ways, which is why I needed 8,000 words in Esquire to tap into it. Maybe
it's a brilliant 8,000 words. As soon as you left, I sent you a note and said, as soon as you are ready, I want to talk to you. And you said, I'm working on a piece. I'm processing it. And that's what, I learned at Amherst. I was lucky enough to go there. Writing is processing your thoughts, right? And the communication of thinking and the synthesis of thinking and analysis and all that. And the way you write is got a snarkiness to it and a humor and a relatability and an accessibility that's so important in telling that story. And I was on TV recently, and they said, what do you think about the popularity of the war going down? And I mentioned, Tucker Carlson's banging away, and you've got other propagandists that are chipping away at support, but support for our own wars drops over time, and we didn't pay attention to our own wars. So the challenge of trying to get people to continue to focus on and support Ukraine is exceptionally difficult, even more than it was in our own war. So it's kind of, deja vu all over again. Can I ask, I want to move to, other topics before we close, but I want to ask you straight up, Matt, if you were president, or if you had the ear of Joe Biden, and he said, Matt, what should I do? What should America do? What do you say? Because I know you're not a political person per se, but you've been there, you've done that. You know what you're doing. You're smart, and you're also great at ringing the bell, saying, hey, America, this is, what's happening and what we need to do. What would you tell the president America needs to do that differently?
Give them the F-16s. If we take one lesson from Iraq and Afghanistan, it's to listen to the actual locals on the ground, right? There's so many differences between Ukraine and those wars. It's a sovereign democracy fighting in defense of itself rather than kind of toppling something and trying to impose it. But the big one for me is, I've been places in Iraq where I know I'm not welcome, right? I know what that's, you know it too, what that stink eye, what that stare looks like. Yep. Something like the Kyiv Independent did a poll. It's like 96% of Ukrainians support Western aid, right? And anecdotally, over there, people hear American English being spoken. I mean, they just come over to thank you for being there. Like they I could, even when I say, "Oh, I'm here as a journalist," they don't care, right? So listening to if we take anything from the last 20 years, it's what do the actual locals, not the powerful tribal sheiks benefiting from contracts say, what do the actual locals on the ground say, right? So, I think that's something that I try to stress to folks when they ask me about Ukraine is, this is helping end a genocide. I broke through to one of my very conservative friends on this issue because who has very embittered feelings towards his service in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also served in Bosnia. And when I said, maybe there's some more parallels here to that than there are to what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, he's like, okay, maybe I need to think about that a bit more. So that applies at the political level, right? Stop. We just need to stop with the kind of Henry Kissinger geopolitical chess games. And hey, what is going to end this war soonest? Because ending this war as quickly as possible will save lives, both Ukrainian and Russian, right? If that's what the Ukrainian political leaders and the Ukrainian generals and Ukrainian soldiers are saying they need more of, listen to them. On the ground level, I heard that we spent a night with some territorial defense drone hunters. They have literally a Browning machine gun mounted to the back of a pickup truck, shooting down Shahed drones, it sounds so ghetto, frankly, but it works. It works. Who am I to argue? Who am I to argue? It's their war. They can prosecute it. We're there for support. And send us. I said, what do you guys need more of? And they're like, listen, all the other stuff is great, but we need weapons. Send us weapons. We need weapons. And that will end the war. And if we truly, all the moral reasons for supporting Ukraine make sense. All the pragmatic reasons make sense as well. I mean, a drop in the bucket of our DoD budget is whittling away at a very serious adversary. But let's save lives. Let's save lives, and that means providing the heavy duty weaponry that the Ukrainians are requesting. And if we listen to them and let them take the lead, they've done more than anybody expected already. They will continue to do so. That has been what I've observed.
That you should just write all that down. That's your op-ed to counter Bret Stephens right there. I mean, it's I've called it, this geopolitical game of Mother May I that they're stuck in, and just give them what they fucking need and trust. Sure. We trust them. Either you trust them with the guns or you don't. Right. And if you give them one gun, give them what they need to win. And I appreciate how you frame it in terms of saving lives, because that we do want to end the war. That is an objective, but it's also, I don't think people, and I don't even appreciate how messy it is, how bloody, how traumatic, how terrible it is on a scale and scope that maybe we've never seen in modern times. And people used to always say, well, would we let another Rwanda happen? Well, we're watching, right? And this is different, of course, but the failure to act is something that is, I think, kind of a unique American thing right now, where there's a lot of hemming and hawing, and then eventually we do the right thing, but it seems to always take too long and be too painful, whether it's, burn pits or January 6th accountability or Ukraine. So I hope that maybe our generation of leaders can move it forward. I hope you can stick around for a couple extra Patreon member questions. That'll be fun. But you're a master of all things, including sports. I wish you had a sports column every week, because you're fucking amazing on sports. We've got so much sports happening. And, while we're talking about this serious stuff, it's uniquely American. Like, we watch Ukraine, then we turn over to March Madness and the World Baseball Classic and the NBA and all that. Can I ask you to pull back and, where are we in sports in America? Where sports seems bigger than ever, and maybe the ultimate distraction when we need it the most, because our country is so fucked up and there's so much trauma after COVID and all of this. But what's sports now in America, Matt? And what about it excites you?
Sports, as always, is both an escape and I think an interesting prism into which you can look into the state of the country. I think Wright Thompson of ESPN had an incredible piece about 2 months ago, following the Ukrainian soccer team, kind of exploring, trying to be these young men who feel the burden of being symbols of an entire society at war, under threat of survival, but they're also just young athletes, right? Trying to do the best they can, often against teams that are probably slightly favored against them. So, with sports, there's a lot of good happening. There's a lot of bad. I mean, just last night, I thought it was just an incredible baseball game, the World Baseball Classic between Japan and America. America didn't win, but that's okay, right? Like, seeing the sheer joy on Ohtani's face and his teammates after he struck out Trout was, I don't know. It made me proud to be a human being, right? These are real people who have devoted their lives to perfecting this craft. Sometimes I wasn't a big baseball guy growing up, but again, settling into middle age, maybe, watching Clayton Kershaw pitch when he's on, I feel like I'm watching Van Gogh paint, right? I mean, it is actually poetry in action. It is a beautiful thing. But then, take a viewed through another way, sports is incredibly corrupt, right? I mean, it's the NFL. I know we're both big NFL fans. I can't quit it, even though I threatened to a few times over the years. Yeah. Even being a Browns fan, if I can't quit it, nothing will make you do it. But the NFL can never get out of its own way. We had a guy literally die on the field until a genuine hero brought him back to life on the Bills, about 2 months ago. That is going to happen again, right? And I'm sure you and your wife have had these conversations, but like, my boys aren't playing tackle football. They're just not going to. I did. I wasn't very good at it, and I learned some hard lessons in that experience that served me well, in particular in the Army. But it's just not worth it. And it's odd seeing that the spectacle of football is as big and grand as ever, and I still watch it. I don't feel good doing it sometimes, but I still watch it. So, like a lot of things, like the state of American society, like the state of American politics, a lot of good, a lot of bad. It's never just pure escapism, though, and I think that's where some people get tripped up, where they'll yell, like, hey, Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets. Speaking of incredible theater and incredible combination of politics and sports, Aaron Rodgers versus the New York media is going to be chef's kiss. Just true theater. I can't wait.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, unfortunately, war is the ultimate reality TV, and in America, politics is too. But the reality TV of sports right now is just off the charts, and all these stories that are happening. I was just reading about the Ukrainian heavyweight who is trying to land a fight with Tyson Fury, and they're going back and forth on negotiations, and they want to donate $1 million to Ukraine. I mean, there's all these interwoven components, and Rodgers coming to the Jets is just amazing. I mean, what a time to be in New York for sports, with Aaron Rodgers potentially here, and with Aaron Judge re-signing, and the Giants and the Jets and all of it. It's all a lot. But I also feel like it's one of those rare things that does unite America, right? Whether it's the Super Bowl or something else. And when it comes to football, I kind of view it a lot like the military, right? Like, there are plenty of families that say, you'll never join the military, and that kid's going to go fucking join, right? That's true. And my kids are, 16. He may be sneaking off to go put a helmet on and play middle linebacker. But all this is just more about the stew that is America, and you are the chef, like, helping us through it. And I hope you write or do, like, I wish you did a regular fatherhood thing. I wish you did a regular sports thing. I hope that everyone gives you any platform you can, because you're such an important voice. And I said this early on. I was honored to work with you at IAVA when you were working on some of your early stuff, but I think you're one of the most important voices of our time. And it's bigger than just Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's fun to see, and it's inspiring and important to see so many of our colleagues do different things, whether it's Wes at Governor or you. The new novel is Daybreak. When is it coming out?
February 2024, from my publisher Atria, and it's a short novel, but it's set during the Russian invasion in Ukraine last winter. It's based on some folks that we knew when we were going in as trainers. We were kind of arriving at the same time as the first group of international legionnaires, and one American vet, Han Lee, is going to fight because he's still got a lot of fight in him, and the other American vet, Luke Paxton, is going to help, but it's also because there's an old flame, Ukrainian woman named Svetlana, that he never could shake. And they both served in Afghanistan about 10 years before, so they're kind of dealing with some leftover issues from that. And it was the book just kind of came together in a way. This will be my third novel, my fourth book, and I don't know, it felt right from page one in a way that my previous books sometimes didn't. They were more of a fight. This one just kind of came together real well. I'm just kind of really excited to share it with readers because I don't know, it's good. I'll be honest, Paul. It's good.
I'm sure it is. I mean, everyone should check out Youngblood. Everyone should check out Kaboom. Empire City is awesome. I mean, and frankly, I feel like now you got enough of these that like the movies need to be coming. And unfortunately, not everyone reads books. Less people read books than ever before. But I can't wait one day. I hope there will be movies of all of your books. And I just can't recommend them highly enough. I can't recommend you highly enough. You've put out multiple books and 2 children, and your wife is amazing. And I'm really honored to know you, man. Thank you for coming back on the show. Who'd you pick in your bracket?
Purdue, same as you, I think. Yeah.
Oh shit!
It's okay. Duke lost. That's all that matters. Everything else is fine as long as Duke loses.
I'll tell you what. I got a number of parenting recommendations, and one is like do brackets with your family.
Yes.
Even if you don't know anything, if you don't care, we had a World Cup bracket on the wall, and we do geography class around it. Now, we have to figure out. My kids are learning about all the colleges. And my 4-year-old loves TCU because they're the Horned Frogs and they have cool uniforms, right? But it's a great thing as a family. It's a fun time in America, and you are an important voice. Thank you, the great and powerful Matt Gallagher. Belated happy St. Patrick's Day. Happy Iraq anniversary. I don't know what we fucking say, right?
Remembering it, I think, is the most important thing. But really great catching up with you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, brother. Stay vigilant.